Are you in a band? Are you an entertainment entrepreneur? Are you a musician, songwriter, or producer? Or are you wanting to start a career in the music industry? If so, then this podcast is for you. On the Do That Music Thing podcast, we'll be interviewing subject matter experts, artists, and other leaders in the music industry to identify actionable strategies to move you forward in your career, spark some inspiration, and at the least just have some fun talking about music. So let's get to it and do that music thing. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Do That Music Thing, where we are working to help you find access and strategies and success in the music industry. Whether you are an artist, a songwriter, or working on the label side, we want to help push you further in your career. And today I have an absolutely amazing guest on the show. He's been in record promotion for 42 years, worked in all the formats, R&B, rock, pop, country. He's worked with probably some of the biggest names in music. You've heard of them: Queen, Eagles, George Strait, Curtis Mayfield, Shania Twain, The Cars. The list goes on and on and on. Let's give it up for the amazing and wonderful Bruce Shindler.
Yes, amazing and wonderful.
You should add that to your...
That's what I was called many years.
I believe it, 1,000%. Bruce, thank you for joining me on the show today. Our paths crossed by my mother, who was an artist, and she was with a group called The Girls Next Door. And tell us a little bit about how you met my mother, and we'll go there.
Well, when I first moved to Nashville in '84 from New York, I got a job with MTM Records. Mary Tyler Moore Company had a label in Nashville. They started. I was hired as the head of promotion, and one of the original groups that was signed was the Girls Next Door. And so I got to work with them for what was about 3-4 years, and we had a couple of hit records with them, that got their name out there, and yeah, it was great hearing them on the radio.
And that was your job. You got all those incredible songs on the radio. You are a record promoter.
Correct.
So for our listeners who don't know what a record promoter does, why don't you break that down for us?
Well, record companies hire you, or you can have your own independent company, which I had many years later too, whereas you get hired by, let's say you work for the label. So of course, any artist on that label, you're given, and then you sit with the artist, you hear their music. Very often we hear it, most of the time, of course, months before it comes out, or a little while before it comes out anyway, and put together a plan. Now, depending on the size of the record company, now everybody has regionals. You have a national person at the top, which is what my job was at the time. And then you have regionals, and you usually have 4 or 5: Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, Southwest, West Coast. And everybody goes to their radio stations. They've developed relationships that they develop over the years. The bottom line is, you could have the best relationships in the world, but if the music's not there, it's not going to sell, and people aren't going to get excited, then it's that happens in most cases. To be honest with you, I mean, the percentage of the big acts making it takes a lot of work and a lot of time. Well, I guess we'll get into the fact that back in the day, we had a thing called artist development. Whereas if the first one didn't happen, then you say, okay, what went wrong? You kept going. Sometimes back in the 70s, we kept an artist for 4 or 5 albums before they broke. Queen, Bohemian Rhapsody, was on their 4th album. That's the one that made them sell out arenas and stadiums from that album on. But we had 3 other albums before that. Killer Queen was kind of a introductory single to them that really didn't hit the top 10. So it really was not a big hit record. In some markets, it was. Boston was ahead of the game with Queen when you compare it to New York. And I was in New York at the time. We needed ABC in New York to get it played. So we finally got ABC on it. Once ABC in New York, WABC was an AM station. AM was the big radio at the time. And once they played it, that was it. It broke Queen all over the country. And so that's what you have to do, develop the relationships. But you also have to, the relationships get a lot better when you walk in with the goods.
Now that we kind of have a good idea about what a record promoter does, let's go back in time. You know, tell us how you ended up in record promotion and how you were able to grow a successful career. Let's go all the way back to the beginning, and let's build this story for our listeners.
Okay, so I grew up, in Long Island and went to college for 2 years, took communication arts. During that time, I got a job at the Fillmore East in New York as an usher. A friend of mine said, hey, a bunch of us go down there and they hire you and they pay you $15 a night. I said, okay. This was 1970. I was 20. And because I worked there 70 and 71. And it was magic. They were paying me to see these acts and just to tell people to put joints out. Here's your seat. They didn't let you smoke inside because it was an old theater, could go up in flames at any time. Not many people paid attention to that, but to make the New York Fire Department happy, the ushers had to run around, go and put out that joint. So, but I got to see what was going on. I got to go hang out backstage and hang out with some of these people playing there. And I was there when the Allman Brothers recorded live at the Fillmore that weekend, which is right. I was there that weekend, and classic. And I even remember people yelling out that are on the record. There's one guy yells at, "What? Play all night," when I think they're playing Whipping Post. And that's Bob Henkel. He was an usher standing next to him going, "Play all night." That's on the record. Anyway, so while I was doing that, I ended up quitting college because I really had to get out of the house, to be honest with you. I was still living home, had to get out of the house, moved into the city. And my brother-in-law's cousin worked at Elektra Records in New York. So I said, maybe they got a job up there. So I went to visit him, and he, hanging out, and he says, well, there's no jobs in a promotion, and you've never done promotion. We can't give you a promotion job. I said, well, that's cool, But, I saw what they did. And on my way out, I said to the receptionist, any jobs here like mailroom or whatever? She says, well, the accounting department needs a file clerk. I said, who do I speak to? Now, remember, I had hair down to here. I was a hippie. And, hippie is a clean hippie. I did take showers. And anyway, the head accountant comes out and says, can you count? And I said, yeah. He said, okay, when do you want to start? So I ended up getting a job in the accounting department with a bunch of bookkeepers sitting there. This is before computers, gang. I had to go through invoices and file invoices, and you file them in file cabinets in order. So these were orders, record orders. This was the money that was coming in and going out in invoice form. So that was my job. I could sit there with headphones and just do that all day. So I was doing that during the week, working at the Fillmore at night. Where was I sleeping? There was the YMHA up in New York, not YMCA, YMHA, Young Men's Hebrew Association on 92nd and Lexington Avenue. And you could get a room there for $85 a month, be a member of the Y and sleep there, work at the Fillmore on the weekends, file clerk during the day. Now, after a year, I got bored being a file clerk. And plus, the Fillmore is going to be closing in 71. Yeah, which was a heartbreak. But I decided New York at that time in 71 was high crime. It was dirty. It wasn't the, loved it. I never had any problems there. But I kept thinking about California. I ended up leaving, and people at the company said, listen, when you go out to California, look this person up and look that person up. And so I got lists of names from the people at the record company to look up. And one of the names was somebody named Harvey Cooper at Bell Records. Bell at the time was distributed independently. Let me explain to your audience. Warner, Elektra, Atlantic had their own distribution. That's WEA. Sony at the time was not Sony, it was Columbia, but there was the Columbia had Epic and their own distribution set up, all their labels. Other labels, smaller ones like Bell, Motown, Buddah, were independently distributed. There were warehouses around the country that would put their records out into the record stores. They didn't have their own warehouses. Harvey meets me from Bell Records, likes me. In the meantime, I get a job at the Warner Elektra Atlantic warehouse because I got a name from New York. It was Joel Friedman, who was the president of WEA. And I got an interview with him. I wasn't afraid to call the president of WEA and say, he had met me before, so he kind of knew me. So let me say that. But I was a kid and I came in, he said, looks like you need a job. I said, yeah. He said, we'll get you a job in the warehouse in Glendale. So I'm working at the WEA warehouse in Glendale. And then Harvey calls me from Bell, who I was hanging out with too. And he says, do you want to, I need a guy in Phoenix at an independent distributor. You know, they distribute about our label plus Motown and Bell and then a bunch of other small ones. I said, listen, I'll go to Phoenix. I mean, you know, I'm not going to be fussy here. So sends me to Phoenix. And I end up working Bell, Motown, Buddah, and all these others. Now, when you say working, I'm working in a warehouse. I'm calling the radio stations in the Southwest. That's who this distributor covered. I'm calling the radio stations. I had a very small expense budget, so I really didn't have money to take people out to dinner and all that kind of stuff. But we were the distributor people, and it was a good relationship. And so not only calling the radio stations, I was calling the national people at the labels to tell them what I was doing and how close maybe a radio station might be to adding their record. So I would call in ads or not ads, but they appreciated somebody from their guy in the Southwest calling them. Now, they had their own people too, the labels, but I was their independent distributor guy. And then if I had to do my own packing of records, you know, for radio stations, say, hey, I need that new album. Would you send it to me? You know, I'm the one who would have to go in and box it up and tape it and stick the label on and send it. It was very interesting working with vinyl records in Phoenix when it's 102 degrees outside. When I visited a radio station, I made sure I brought about 10 copies because half of them became ashtrays. They would bend, you put them in your trunk or the back seat. And you make sure you turned your air conditioner on real quick because that vinyl would melt pretty quick. So anyway, it was fun working with vinyl, but it sounded great once it got on. So after 6 months there, I was kind of homesick, didn't care for Phoenix, didn't care for really the guy I was working for at that distribution house. And I moved back to New York. Now, remember, I was calling record labels when I was there. I find out one of the labels I'm calling in New York is Buddah Records, a guy named Jerry. And I say to Jerry, I'm leaving. And then, we keep in touch. I find out they need a New York guy at Buddah Records. I'm back in New York. I called Jerry. He goes, man, you were always good to me when you were at that distributor. You always called me and stuff. Why don't you come in and talk to us? So I run into New York to 810 7th Avenue, and I go up there. It's a famous building, by the way. And make a long story short, he comes out, talks to me, says, okay, 145 a week and unlimited expenses. I said, I'll take it. So what is unlimited expense? I said, what? I said, I don't even have a credit card. I'm 22 years old at the time. This was a year later. I'm 22. He said, you need cash? I said, yeah. He said, fill out this check requisition. He says, you're going to need an apartment in New York, aren't you? Because you live where do you live? I said, well, I'm back home right now. He said, you got to get an apartment. So he has me fill out this check requisition form, and I get $2,000 in cash. And he said, go get an apartment and put the rest in your pocket. Now, let me say this, folks. I'm telling you, people want to get in the record business. That doesn't happen anymore. Nobody's going to do that. That was like the old days, and this was a record company that could do stuff like that. So anyway, that's how I got into it. I was at Buddah Records in New York. I started working bigger acts. We had Gladys and the Pips, Curtis Mayfield, Bill Withers. We had Charlie Daniels at the time. So Charlie had Uneasy Rider, which was a hit record, plus some rock albums. You could get them played on country radio. You could get them played on rock. Now, let me explain something here, that the promotion people, the local promotion people in those cities at that time went to all the formats. We didn't have, I wasn't just the guy who said, gee, the country guy is going to only go to this station, and the pop guy is going to go here, and the rock guy is going to go here, like they do now. Everybody's specialized now. At that time, now we did have an R&B department, and they had promotion people. But my job was to go to every radio station in the market. I went to country, I went to R&B, I went to rocks. So I'm in New York, so we got these great stations, WNEW-FM and LIR in Long Island, two great rock stations. So it was just a dream for me. There was only one place to hear new music. This is what's important between now and then. You only had radio then. We didn't have the phones. We didn't have streaming. We didn't have MTV. It was just radio. So radio was extremely important with selling records, and they did. I mean, you could put something out, sell hundreds of thousands the first week in the right market. Like in New York, if it was a black crossover record, like a Gladys Knight and the Pips, which not only got played on black stations, but on white stations, on like ABC, the top 40 stations, you could sell, hundreds of thousands just off the R&B stations. And then ABC adds it, makes it a pop record, and sells 1 million in New York, So it was very vital, very juicy market at the time.
What was the time frame from a new record hitting radio to selling? What was the time frame? Was it like next day, or was it, what did that sales cycle look like from radio to purchase?
Well, it depends on who the artist was, of course. See, if it's a big artist, let's say once Queen broke and you had the new Queen record, or Eagles. I worked with the Eagles. They always had hit records. Those records got on, a matter of fact, sometimes we had leaking problems with an Eagles record. There was one time when I was in San Francisco, I'll get to your answer with this. And somebody from LA, I think it was the management company, um, mailed a test pressing before it was even released to KFRC in San Francisco. Now, here you go. We didn't have streaming. I couldn't download the song to all the other radio stations immediately. So they were pissed. I had to get in my car, drive to every station in San Francisco. Now, keep in mind, I did Northern California. It wasn't just San Francisco. My area was Northern California, Reno and Tahoe. So it's big. And I had to get a record. Now, some of them had to wait till the next day till I could overnight it. But others, I had to just get in my car and drop it around the station. But you say how quick? That was quick. But then, you know, if you're trying to break a new act, it's like any other time, you know, you're scratching and clawing for ads. Let me give you an example. In pop, as opposed to country, country is if you had a big name, you'd automatically get on. I mean, it was almost like, hey, George Strait's got a new record. It's going on Monday, even without hearing it. But it's not like that in pop. You could have a big act like Queen and then have a stiff on the next one. So everything was record to record. So when I was at Buddah and we had this new group called Stories, and they came out with a song called Brother Louie. As soon as I heard, I knew it was a #1 record, a big record. So we put it out, I would say within 12 weeks time, 10 weeks time, it was up there, 12 weeks time. You know, it moved up pretty fast. Again, it depends on the strength of record and how fast it's going to move. They move slower now.
So you're at Buddah Records. You're working with some of my favorite artists of all time. Bill Withers is probably one of my like top 5 favorite artists of all time. I could listen to that man sing forever. And so what comes next? You're clearly moving and shaking. You're making great relationships. And that's one reoccurring theme that I hope everyone is hearing is that you are building solid relationships. And that's what, at least from my viewpoint, is what is propelling. You know, you were good to people. And you said it to the fellow that got you the placement in Buddah was, you were good to me, so let me be good to you. And that is one thing that I hope people do more of and can do an incredible amount of good, not just in work, but in your life. You know, do good. And it'll usually come back around. But anyway.
Well, there were, you know, two kinds of people. There were those who used intimidation, and there are those who used what I say, a spoon of honey instead of vinegar. And I preferred the honey. But you also have to know when to not get taken advantage of. So you also have to know when to be strong and say, listen, you can do that to me once, but we can't have that kind of, you can't do that to me again. So you have to have the kind of relationship where you can have those. Now, you can't do that with every station you meet. Everybody's not going to be your best friend. That's another thing to learn in promotion. Find the people who you can click with, who are open to listening to your product, who are open to playing music, and then you work on, you know, other people. But, you know, I had very good professional relationships with people. They weren't my friends, some of them. You know, they didn't have to be my best friends. But you know what? When we spoke to each other, we trusted each other. And that's important, trust. Don't go into a station and say everything you got is a hit, is a monster. Just say, hey, listen to this. You tell me. You want them to tell you you got a hit record. And if they don't, you can't change somebody's religion. You can't tell them if they like the color blue to like the color red. You can't make them do that. But maybe the color red or blue or pink will benefit them in a particular situation. It's, positive reinforcement.
Love that. Yeah, do more of what works. So what happens after Buddah? Where do you go? What do you do after Buddah?
Well, Buddah, what happened with Buddah was run by Neil Bogart, who was brilliant. But he decided to leave and form Casablanca on the West Coast. So when they were leaving, I knew Buddah was going to he was the genius at Buddah. So I knew it was going to be a problem. An opening happened at the original record company I did filing for. Remember when I was a file clerk? And I had become friends with a promotion guy at Elektra named Rick Aliberti. He was in charge of the region. I was a local guy in New York. His job was the Northeast region and to be over the local people. So he would be over New York. So he liked me. And he says, "You want a job? I'm getting rid of the guy who's there. I'm firing him. And how about you taking the job?" So for me, it was like going back home. This is the place. When I was 21, I was a file clerk. And Elektra Asylum, at the time when I was a file clerk, it was Elektra Records run by Jack Holzman. By the time I'm a promotion man, it's Elektra Asylum. Asylum had gone together and David Geffen was running it. So I was working with David Geffen. So it was wonderful that they had Eagles, Queen, Jackson Browne, Joni Mitchell, Carly Simon, Judy Collins, Tom Waits, Zevon. I know some of these names to some people out there they don't know. I was speaking to a younger person the other day mentioning Warren Zevon, and he looked at me very strange, but please check Warren Zevon out if you don't know who he is. The Cars were on there. Then we had the Dictators and Television, which when the punk new wave stuff started happening in New York, we started signing acts like that, so it was just it's a great label. It was a great label.
I remember, I think I was watching a documentary. Well, it mentioned, I'm not sure of the documentary, but it mentioned a segment on Asylum, the creation of Asylum and the artist roster. And I was just like, wow, like what a time, to be involved. So you got to promote some of those Asylum records.
You get to promote them. You get to take the artists to the radio stations. You get to go on tour, in your region with them to make sure that the radio people, meet them. That's my job. My job is radio, not just to hang out with the groups. My job was to, when they played somewhere, "Hi, you got to meet the program director, so-and-so. He's playing the hell out of your record." And that way, the acts know out there who's helping them. And some acts are better than others. Pop acts aren't as, what should I say, public friendly as the country acts are. The country acts were really like, they want to meet everybody. They want to meet the fans. They want to meet, at the time, the pop acts were like, "Yeah, do I have to? All right, But that's just them. You have to accept their idiosyncrasies, and most of them were probably pretty stoned anyway. So,
that's a good point, though, that you mentioned, not just making phone calls. It's not just sending out packets or, delivering LPs or delivering singles. It's you were working with the artists. That's a big piece of radio promotion. It's not just the radio piece. It's also the artist piece. So let's talk about that.
Yes. I would get a phone call, from the bosses in LA, say so-and-so is playing in, like, let's say when I was in San Francisco and they said so-and-so's in San Jose, which I knew anyway, and they said, make sure that's covered. And of course, I'm going to cover it. There was a time where two of my acts were playing in a market in two different areas. And I had set up a big promotion with one of them. It was Jackson Brown was playing with Orleans. Orleans was on our label. And that was down in the peninsula. But I had Sergio Mendes playing the Concord Pavilion, which was in another area. And my boss calls me and says, I need you to cover Sergio Mendes. And I said, and Sergio's brilliant and he's wonderful, but I had set up this whole promotion. So, you got to kind of figure out how you're going to do this, because I'm bringing radio people down to this Jackson Brown Orleans thing. So I had to do a lot of political calls and saying somebody else needs to cover Sergio Mendes because I can't be in two places at once. And I got radio people here. So that particular person wasn't too happy with me in LA. But at the same time, you do what you got to do. But you should listen to your bosses. Yes. The thing is, about the time when I was doing promotion, we didn't have cell phones. They couldn't get a hold of us. So if I wanted to do what I wanted to do, I did what I did, because they couldn't call me or email me. I mean, I could go on the road for 3 days and I'd call in once a day and go, I'm out here, I'm visiting stations. Okay. And you never heard from anybody for 3 days. They knew I was on the road. It was really a free job. So working with the artists, your question was, go to these places and introduce them to the radio people. And we did a lot of this, of course, in country, set up promotions. Of course, you have your meet and greets, backstage, but sometimes you have like, a flyaway where 2 lucky winners can fly to go see Sugarland. I worked with, see Sugarland play Las Vegas. And that's a radio promotion. But the artist has to know this. Managers, you have to work closely with. This is important. It's not like me calling the artist on the telephone. Never call the manager. Say, this is what I got. And you go over these things with a calendar. Now, very often, sometimes artists give you a hard time. They're tired. They don't feel good. Whatever. And they don't want to do a radio thing. And I'll give you an example. Now, this never happened to me in country, but I was working with an act, and I'm not going to say who because I don't want to put any bad vibes there. And they were going to do a live broadcast on Long Island. And I'm telling everybody this story so you know my job wasn't just all dinners and happiness and stuff all the time. So they're going to do a live broadcast, a show on Long Island at a recording studio. So they're staying at the Plaza Hotel in New York. It's a group, by the way. And I go up to the group and I knock on the door to pick them up. We have the limo downstairs, going to take them to Long Island, and they're going to do a 1 hour nice acoustic set. I knock on the door opens this much. The manager sticks his nose out and goes, they're not going, and closes the door. I knock again. He opens it again. I said, what do you mean they're not going? So-and-so doesn't feel good. And I can hear them laughing in the back. I know they're in there. So I call my regional boss, the guy who hired me at Elektra, Rick, and Rick comes down. He knocks on the door. We get the same thing, slam door in our face. Call LA. We find a phone somewhere. Again, no cell phones. We're in the hallway. You got to find a phone to call LA. LA, Elektra Asylum was very artist friendly because of Geffen. So the artists could really get away with in this particular situation with murder. The artists were almost never wrong. So I had to call the radio station because LA would not have. LA said, well, there's nothing we can do. What do you want us to do? I said, well, we'll lose a radio station, you know, and I had to call the radio station, tell them, look, one of them's not feeling good. They're not coming, and I'm sorry. And of course, they were very angry, and I'm the representative, so they're angry at me. They're angry at Elektra. Of course, you know, their album was taken out of the studio and never played again. At the same time, it makes my job awkward promoting new acts to this radio station. So why is this new act gonna do what the last act did to me? You know, this kind of thing. You know, it's your reputation. It's what we said before, credibility. When I say to you, I'm gonna do something for you, I'm gonna do it, and I better follow up. Otherwise, I shouldn't be doing the job. So those are some of the things that it eventually mellowed out in time, and they were very good friends of mine. This is important, why it's good to have friends at the radio stations, because when situations like this happen, at least you're friends with them. They understand in their heart it's not your fault, but they got to blame somebody. So it works out, but you have to let them make their point, and they made their point, you know. And that's artist relations. They can be great. I had artists like Charlie Daniels would do anything for you, anything. Harry Chapin, I worked with. Harry, can you do this, you know, show? Sure, where? You know, boom, he's gone. It was like that with some artists. No begging, no pleading, no nothing. It was like they knew that it's their career. They needed radio to get played. And even if they didn't need radio, it was just their attitude of enjoying what they're doing. I tell artists, don't try to be famous, just be great. And, you know, let the rest take care of itself. You know, be great, but it's your art that's going to talk.
And that's the second time you've mentioned that. You know, it doesn't, initially you said that radio promotion, you can be a great promoter, but if the music isn't good, doesn't matter how good you are.
No, you know, people talk about payola. Let's talk about that, because when they talk about record promotion, they talk about payola. So let's talk about that. You can do favors all you want, and you will get the record on, but you can't make the listeners buy it or not turn off your radio station to another radio station if they don't like the song. So payola was just back in the day where there's, you know, cash, you know, here, play this record, you know, like we heard, that doesn't go on. That doesn't go on like it does. When the corporations took over the radio stations, the payola took a different form. And it was not to help individuals like they used to back in the day. Yeah, you know, you used to see all these program directors who made like, you know, 20 grand a year, 10 grand a year driving Cadillacs, you know? And you're going, how are they driving Cadillacs? There was one program director in LA drove, you know, he drove a Rolls Royce, you know? But what's going on now is iHeart's, Cumulus, and these big chains, you know, are owning these, and these are major corporations. Before, when I was doing it in the 70s, and you look at the 60s and 50s, these were all individually owned radio stations. Yeah, there was some companies like ABC would own a certain amount, but they couldn't own more than one station in a market, or two. I forget what the original FCC was. Now they can own every station in the market, like 5 of them, and the TV station. You know, before you couldn't do that. The program director calls a promotion person now and goes, listen, we're doing a St. Jude's thing in a month. Can your act do the St. Jude's show? Your new act, or your act that's big, whatever. And I called the manager. Yeah, we're available to do an acoustic, come by with a guitar and do some songs. They know that I got a new record out. They usually do it with a record, and they go, well, we want to support it. I said, do you like the record? Yeah, we love the record. We want to play it. Great. So they play the record and they get the artist playing there. You could say, oh, did they play there? Did they play the record because they played there? Well, if the station liked the record in the first place and had intentions on doing it, I'm there to support the radio station. Okay. But like I said, whatever you do, you might get 5 spins a week. Let's say you get a favor. Let's say you go, okay, we'll let Bruce have a favor. We'll add this record. 5 spins a week. That's what, if you look at the charts where the record companies look, they look for their 5 spin ad week, 5 spin ads. Where's 5 spins? In most cases, overnight, or might come up, in the evening. Bottom line is, it's not going to get much airplay until it's a hit. And that's a catch-22, because you got to go to the people who really love the record enough to play it more than 5 spins. Okay? And if an act is coming to town, I say to the radio person, you're playing the record 5 spins and they're coming into town. I hope they would get more exposure, and that are, usually they'll go, yeah, when they come into town, we'll be playing it like 15 times a week, 20 times or whatever. So great. That's, how we deal with it. It's like, if I'm going to do this for you, don't be a hypocrite and let your audience know who this act is, So anyway, that's where it's at now. You got to be very careful. Paola, now, anything you do for radio station, you have to sign a letter that says, and the radio station has to sign a letter that says this promotion was not done for any airplay. And the general managers have to sign it at the stations, not the program directors. So that's what's going on now. So everybody's watching it real careful.
Interesting. So out of this, super incredible era in songwriting, let's fast forward. You're in country music now. How did you end up in country music? How did you make that transition? And, how did that play out?
Yeah, it's funny. New York guy, right? Grew up in New York, right? I'm like country. I'm very country. I loved great songs. Okay. And remember I told you local promotion people would hit every format in their market. So I would go to WHN in New York, which was a big country station. And at Elektra, we had Eddie Rabbitt, Melba Montgomery, we had Dick Feller, we had some stuff going. So it was my obligation, plus the Eagles and Ronstadt, and got airplay on country. Blue Bayou was a hit country record at the time. It was great. Well, what happened was, through life changes and things that happen in industry changes after the disco years happened, and that was horrible. I ended up getting a job at a small label called Life Song Records. I was working with Cashman and West. And this is in New York. This is in 81, about 81. And they had done very well. They used to produce Jim Croce. Jim Croce was Tommy West's college roommate, and they ended up producing and working the Jim Croce stuff until his death. Anyway, they were producing country music. I'm at Life Song Records, and they were producing Ed Bruce, Gail Davies, group called Corbin and Hannah. So I was calling country stations. And remember when I was working for Elektra, I worked country, especially when I went out to the West Coast. They had a lot of country stations out there. So I was, visiting country stations out there. So it wasn't like a format that was mysterious to me. It wasn't something I went home and listened to all the time, though, for my own. I was a rocker, But I get to Life Song, and then I go to Main Street, which is another small record company in New York. And I got to come down to the CRS. Well, it was called the DJ conventions before CRS, Country Radio Seminar. That was big conventions down here, but it was the smaller conventions called the DJ conventions. I would come down and I started to like Nashville, and that was about in the early 80s, 83, 84. I decided one day, say, I'm getting out of New York again, remember, and moved to Nashville in 84 because I got offered a job with Leon Russell. And Leon Russell had a place in Hendersonville, a big complex, and he had Paradise Records. So I ended up working with Leon, and he had the Hank Wilson albums. That was his alter ego, Hank Wilson, which was his country albums. So I was working on both his pop and his country Hank Wilson albums. And then MTM started, and Tommy West, remember I told you about Cashman and West, the guys who produced Jim Croce, he was the head A&R at MTM. And he, of course, knew me from working for him at Life Song. So he introduced me to two other bosses there, and I got the job at the Mary Tyler Moore Company. And then I ended up hiring Scott Borchetta, who was a kid at the time, to help me at the company called Radio Stations, because I didn't have regionals. It was just me, Scott, and all these independents that I hired. But that's how I got into country. I was familiar with it, but then got into it. And I know you could say, but how does a New York guy like you like country music? And I never looked at it as being anything but music. A lot of it I didn't like. But when I did like it, I figured anybody can like it because I was real fussy. I looked for songs. I looked for harmonies. I looked for something that wasn't nonsense, that was good and not always successful at it. You look for it, but you try it. But then when I was here, when I moved here in 84, by the end of the 80s, country exploded with Travis and Clint and Strait and Good and Garth. I mean, I was in the bird seat, man. It was great.
The early 90s, I mean, to me, that's the golden era of country. And that must have been really cool to be involved. Well, I mean, that's the second time. I feel like you've been involved in so many, like critical mass moments in music. You've got the Asylum era. Now you've got this, late 80s, early 90s country. But you did mention something that I hope the artists that are listening to this, it's about the song. How you said a guy from New York can come down and promote country because ultimately it doesn't matter. Is the song good? Does it connect? And if it connects with you, it's going to connect with the program director. It'll connect with the audience.
And, a lot of people say, well, then why don't you just mail the records to the radio stations? If they got to be good, what do we need you for? And I go, well, that's because they're releasing hundreds of singles a week. And you're a program director with a playlist of 30, 35 songs. And only one or two of them is going to drop off that week, maybe. So there's 2 slots for 20 some odd record labels who want to get their record on that week. If you don't have the relationships and the machinery behind you, and again, that's at that time I'm talking, when you were using promotion people. Now, of course, you get buzzes with TikTok and Spotify and streaming and stuff like that. And that's a whole different conversation with that. But that's different than what, we were used to, where, you get it on, you get the sales or not. And it's an important thing to watch.
Talking about when music went digital and went digital to, the mainstream public, right? We're talking like late 90s, early to mid 2000s. Twofold question. How did that affect your job, your perception of music, but then also where do you see it moving in the future?
My job is basically over. I mean, I hate to say it, and that's why I'm retired. Because back in 2015, I started seeing stuff where I would get on the road. And, you call radio stations, and it used to be, hey, can you get this on this week? Let me see what I can do, or I don't know if I'm going to have a slot, or, now it's, I got to see what the big guy upstairs says I can add. The program directors no longer have the strength, I should say the strength, the power to add these records on their own. Say, hey, this is great. I'm going to get it right on. Nope. It's these corporate radio stations are being pre-programmed or programmed by people on a national basis. So why do you need, you have promotion people who can push a few people now in the street, to do it. But, the days of breaking records right from the street, they're checking out, used to be they're checking out sales. And we were very marketing conscious when it came to that. Now they're checking out streaming. Downloads as sales, people want to pay for the stuff. That's not that big. It's mostly streaming. So my job as a person in the office to call the big guy to deal with the corporate people, those jobs are there still because you're going to need that. But as far as the street people go, the street people are covering the shows. They're making sure the radio people are meeting the artists. They are getting some records on because, there might be a couple of independent, smaller radio stations out there who can do their thing, but not on the amount or numbers that we had before to, break these things. They're not independent anymore, the radio stations.
Tell me, what is if you can narrow it down, what is the most pivotal memory that you have in the music industry? What's the fondest memory you have of working in the music industry?
I would say Breaking Queen, because like I said, they were having a rough time. The first 3 albums, they came to New York. They had management issues that there were eventually lawsuits that were going to go down, but management issues. At one point, Freddie's voice, he was having vocal problems when they were on tour. Brian, I'll tell you a story. We took Queen to visit radio in New York. This was early. I'm talking a second album. I get a call the next day from my boss that's from Boston, Rick, that says, listen, Brian came down, has hepatitis. He's got an infectious hepatitis. All those radio people you visited, you're going to have to get them shots. Now, I'm trying to break this act. They already don't believe in Queen yet. And now I'm calling them. That guy I brought yesterday, you shook his hand? So I had to go with a nurse to the radio stations. And anybody who shook their hands or remembered that they shook his hands or around him got shots. John Deacon slipped in the shower and fell through the glass door and cut his arm open. the day they were going to do the show at Madison Square Garden. They patched him up real quickly with stitches and medication, and just threw him on stage. It was not a great time for them, those first three. We always had some kind of problems, you know. I remember being on the road. They wanted me to fly to Florida with them when we were in Tampa, and they were going to do a show, and they had some promoter had set up some stage in the middle of a muddy racetrack, and the stage was like something that you and me could put together tomorrow. And anyway, we had to cancel the show just because, you know, there's things like that happen. It's like, why with Queen? Every time I'm with these guys, there's some stuff happening, you know. But I love them, and we had a great time. And finally, after, you know, new management, after time, you know, we came out with that fourth album, and the pivotal moment you're asking me for is when Rick Sklar at ABC called me and said, "I'm adding your record." And first time I played it for him, he went, 6 minutes and 50 seconds. I ain't playing 6 minutes. I said, wait a minute now. You played Hey Jude. You played MacArthur Park, which was a 7-minute record. Come on. I said, I'm telling you, man. And Rick knew what was going on. He started hearing the buzz on this record because he was always the last one in the country. So he heard what was going on in Boston and Chicago and some other places. But usually he would wait till something was top 25 to add it. That was his thing. It had to be top 25 in all three trades: Billboard, Cashbox, and Record World Magazine. It'd be 25 with a bullet. So anyway, he called me and said, "I'm adding your record." Yeah. And all the naysayers that we had before who didn't believe in Queen became monster Queen fans and were begging me for tickets to Queen, you know, whenever they played. And I gladly gave it to them. I was happy to give it to them. I was so happy because it took a lot of work and convincing. I didn't even know if it would happen after a while. I just kept going because I loved what they were doing. And that was pivotal for me. I would also say, you know, working with the Eagles and watching them as this Southern California group with, you know, coming out with James Dean already gone, Peaceful Easy Feeling, all this stuff, but then really breaking with, having One of These Nights album, which really took them to another level. And then, of course, Hotel California was just, you know, monstrous. And our Greatest Hits album is still one of the biggest selling albums in history, the Eagles' Greatest Hits.
The story behind that record always makes me laugh. The Greatest Hits record. We don't talk about it now, but if you're listening, just go Google about that record, the Greatest Hits record, and the story is incredible. Well, Bruce, we're getting close to the end here. This is one of my favorite parts of the Do That Music Thing podcast, where we ask the guest, what are 3 things that you can do to push your career forward? And this can be directed to a songwriter. It can be directed to somebody in a mailroom who wants to be a manager or who wants to be an A&R executive. So what are 3 actionable things you would tell someone who wants to kickstart their career in the music industry?
Well, I think the first thing is, and like I did, was I took a job anywhere I could. I had no intentions of being a file clerk. And I don't care if you have a college degree. You know, you may go to a music school and get a degree, but when you get into the record companies expecting a big job without experience, so in other words, we all start as apprentices, become journeymen, and then hopefully masters at some point, maybe. We got to start off, and if it's a job in the mailroom, get in there. I got to tell you, at UMG, Universal Music Group, right here in Nashville, you have no idea how many receptionists have moved up. Male receptionists and female receptionists, mailroom people, promotion coordinators, the assistants. So that's my thing. Try to get anything you can. That's number one. Networking is the big number two. Networking is really important because you're going to meet people. And just because I was a file clerk, I ended up meeting everybody, because when there was a party, they invited everybody, the county department, and I'd meet managers. And first time I remember talking to the Doors manager, and I was a file clerk, and then I see Ray Manzarek there, and but I see other people, and I see other people in other departments, and I got to talk to them. That's important, because you may not know what you want to do. I had people come in saying, I want to be in promotion, but then they eventually want to be in publicity, or vice versa, or they want to marketing. They want to be in marketing. They like sitting in front of a computer and dealing with all those numbers. Some people are numbers crazy. I'm not. They are, and they're good for that. So sit in front of a computer and do all that media stuff, but take anything. So that's important. Third thing is listen. Just listen. Don't go in thinking you know everything. Listen. Use that to your advantage. Give your opinion when asked. You will be asked, because if you work for a good company, they like to include everybody. Mike Dungan, who's the chairman of UMG, was the best at that. When we were coming out with new music, he gave the music to the mailroom people and the receptionist and the people in a bookkeeping. I'd say, I want everybody to tell me what you think. Listening is very important, observing what's going on. So those are probably the three things that I would suggest.
Awesome. Well, Bruce, thank you so much for joining us today on the Do That Music Thing podcast. Can't thank you enough, and hopefully we'll have you back soon. This has been an awesome conversation. I know you've got tons more stories.
I'm sure I do.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Bruce.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Do That Music Thing podcast. To learn more about me, the host, Christopher Foust, you can catch me online at christopherfoust.com, on Instagram at chrisfaustmusic, or on Twitter at chrisjamesgtr. If you'd like to be a guest on the Do That Music Thing podcast, please feel free to email me at chrisfaustmusic@gmail.com. If you're a fan of the show, head on over and leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening. I'm Chris Foust. Let's go do that music thing.